There is something going on with Ark, the once legendary survival game that sees survivors waking up on a mysterious dinosaur-infested island is not the game it used to be. Something is going on and it doesn't feel the same as the old days. Once upon a time, Ark stood out among the other games when it came out. It was distinct, but now something is missing. With the new remaster Ark Survival Ascended, gone is the old individual handcrafted Ark with distinct landscapes and variety. Now, we have every map looking the same, replacing old, unique points of interest like the church on Scorched Earth with bland, easy to mass reproduce relics. Ark feels cheap, uninspired, and generic. And even worse, at the moment, it feels exploitative. With the newest release from Ark, the center dropping with a new creature that players can pay for, that gives them a huge advantage over other players, allowing them to pay to win. So today we're talking about what happened to Ark Survival Evolved and how did we get here. To bring anyone new here up to speed, Ark announced they are making a sequel to Ark 1 that was originally slated for release in 2022. They were going to drop Ark 2, but they delayed it. Due to community feedback when the devs stated that Ark 2 would be a Souls-like third-person experience. But the problem was when they announced Ark 2, they also announced that Ark 1 would effectively be shutting down and not continuing development or new DLCs. So now they had a problem, they needed to fill the gap and continue income streams for Ark 2's development. And that's how we end up here with Ark's new remaster, Ark Survival Ascended. Ark Survival Ascended is just basically Ark 1 but remastered on the Unreal Engine 5 engine. We basically have to pay for Ark 1 twice to get this upgrade after Jeremy, the lead dev on Ark, said it would be a free upgrade and then backtracked 6 months later. So they lied about the price and they've lied about many things in the Ark devs history, also lying about never adding pay to win mechanics to their games and pushing back on it. Compound this with Snail Games, the publisher of Ark, causing many issues for them, and you've got a recipe for disaster that sets us up for why we're in this predicament. So what are the root causes of what's happened to Ark? Well, number one is the issue of splitting the player base. The player base is split between Ark Survival Evolved and Ark Survival Ascended, the Unreal Engine 5 upgrade. One of the issues and the reason Ark feels like it has an identity crisis is the community is not all on the same game anymore. Half are playing Ark 1 and half are on Acer. Acer has not got the momentum that we all thought it would originally, and it effectively eviscerated the original Ark official servers and community. Now, due to some compounding issues, we will explore further that not all players have come across to Ark Survival Ascended, and due to this you have a domino knock-on effect. So now you have a mixed and split community. Half the players are playing and watching Ark 1 and half are playing and watching Ark Ascended. And the playing and watching is also a big part. Viewership on Ark is dropping drastically due to this issue as well. And not all enjoy watching Ark Survival Ascended or enjoy watching Ark 1 anymore respectively. So it's hard for Ark to get the momentum back, and especially considering Ark Survival Ascended is just recycled content, it's understandable that especially on YouTube and with content creation, there is not as much hype alive for Ark nowadays. And hype and interest online and with content creation helps keep games alive these days and interesting, with Ark especially having so many PvP and PvE content creators telling unique stories and playing different ways. The problem is that content creators don't want to do much content on Ark Survival Ascended because the community has not been receptive to it. So many are falling back to Ark 1, and then the viewers aren't even interested in Ark 1 because Ark effectively shut down momentum on that as well. So what Ark needs to do is make Ark Survival Ascended good enough from a foundation for the rest of the players to come over. But the problem is they're not doing that at the moment, and they're destroying Ark Survival Ascended, making it even harder for players to come across. They need to unify the player base and get them all on one game and all on the same page to help push Ark forward. But at the moment they are not doing that, and they're doing the polar opposite by exploiting the player base. Ark has been releasing extra paid DLCs that give players a pay-to-win advantage over other players in the game, dropping exclusive creatures, exclusive drops, and exclusive crazy items that only the players who pay can use against the other players who haven't paid. The community would have been happy just to pay for skins and some cosmetic items, I think, but Ark went from 0 to 100 and dropped full pay-to-win DLCs. And this is after they backtracked and said we wouldn't pay for these expansion. They found a way by adding these extra DLCs And they don't only drop the DLCs, but they force our hand by making the mechanics in these DLCs super powerful. You are actually forced to buy the DLCs, and especially on PvP, you can't compete without them. And it feels like Ark is just exploiting its dedicated fan base to keep the flame alive and enough money coming in to support Ark 2, the new game that they're developing. It doesn't feel like the devs care anymore about Ark 1 like they used to, or Ark Survival Ascended at all. It just feels like they're milking us and exploiting the community to make as much money as they can. And when the money's not coming through because Ark Survival Ascended isn't up to par, they're throwing in exploitive DLCs like the Pyromain, which are a huge gameplay impact on PvP servers, which ruin the PvP gameplay and gameplay loop. And so they've thrown it in with blatant disregard when Jeremy and Jesse said that they would never have pay to play and win mechanics. Now they don't care, and we have new creatures like this Pyromain. The dev said, hey, screw the community, let's make a fire version of the Shadow Main, the most overpowered and disliked creature back in Ark 1. And let's just make it a reskin so it's easy to sell and create. And we'll sell it separately after we told the community they wouldn't pay for all the remastered DLC. Now we force this OP creature on them. Because that's the problem. The devs said after the debacle with the cost of Ark Survival Ascended that we wouldn't pay excess for all these DLCs. And now they've turned around and added DLCs of creatures that we need to pay for or we can't compete. So that's a huge issue. You can pay real money in Ark to win after they told us we wouldn't be able to. It's slimy and it smells of Snail Games, the publisher I mentioned previously, who are a massive Chinese company, and they've tried for the longest time to push exploitive practices on Ark. Back in Ark 1's development, they tried to push a tech shield into the game that the devs at the time pushed back on. So now it feels like the devs aren't pushing back, they've let Snail take over, and they're just grasping to what they can to survive at this point and throwing whatever they can at the player base to help. I think most of the Wildcard original devs have left the project for Ark 2 and let Snail Games take over Ark 1 and Acer and run it into the ground and do what they can before the ship fully sinks. Because let's be frank, Snail Games like flamethrowers and shadow mains and any game mechanics because they play on their servers under the tribe name T. If you guys want to get updated on any of this information, I've got videos on these stories. So let's not forget that Snail Games is the shadowy puppeteer behind the curtain. They're biased against what the community wants in favor of their preference, and they don't care how it affects the community. I've played Ark since it came out in 2015, and I can tell you it's never been this bad. I don't even want to play Ark Survival Ascended anymore because I don't want to play against the Pyromain or the Oasis or any of these OP mechanics that they're throwing into the game that was once upon a time great. They just have disregard for how the game plays out, and all they care about is making money and profits. They don't care how these new DLCs impact the actual gameplay. So it all happened because of Ark 2 being announced and obviously not happening, and the premature closing of Ark 1 all led us to this point where the Ark devs feel stuck in a rut and that they have to do this, but they really don't. They just need to release a new DLC, a new quality content like they used to, and not go down this slippery slope. But Ark has still made millions, so we should not feel bad for them. They should have enough money to continue this development, but lots of profit has been wasted by Snail Games. But it's not up to the community to take on this burden. It's up to the devs to make a good game and make the game good from a foundational standpoint, and not try and scrounge up little bits of chump change by throwing shit at the wall and seeing what sticks. They need to fix the fundamental issues with Ark Survival Ascended, and which there are still many, of this promised remaster from the ground up. Ark Survival Ascended still has huge fundamental gameplay flaws. The gameplay loop is redundant and in need of an overhaul. There's cheating abundant, and even the gameplay from the ground up itself needs to be addressed and looked at. So the gameplay loop in Ark Survival Ascended does not favor small or solo tribes anymore, but just big tribes, as you can't even live in a small cave or location, as beds currently don't work on Ark Survival Ascended, and you'll get anti-meshed or not be able to spawn inside your base. It's the reason I stopped playing. We built in a rat hole without working beds, and then the devs made our spot an anti-mesh spot, and it again segments the player base and ruins a huge part of Ark's popularity, which has been living hidden small in rat holes. Rat hole gameplay has been a huge part of the PvP community especially, and a big part of ARK's core viewership for a long time. Viewers love it, but the devs hate it for some illogical reason. Because of ruining rat holes in small locations, it means solo and small tribes can't compete, compounded by the fact that only one tribe can effectively live on a server, with the meta on Ark Survival Ascended currently being living in a cave, and these caves currently have the only spot that players can access artifacts which are used to fight the bosses and get to endgame in Ark. So effectively, if you're not owning a cave in Ark, you can't get to endgame, and it effectively prim locks you and gives you no access to the endgame content, and one tribe owns the server and can dominate you and has an exponential advantage against the other tribes. So it ends up being this monopoly where there's no chance for one tribe to compete against another if the other tribes have the artifact caves locked, and there's no chance of you pushing in those artifact caves if you're fresh and trying to join a server. So what you have happen is the Ark games servers die really fast about a month in, or even earlier in some cases now that everyone has tech unlocked. And what this means is that the game's momentum dies and players don't come back because they get wiped by the power imbalance and creep. There's no balance to Ark's gameplay loop. In no other game would you have a gameplay loop like this. Imagine in Rust if only one crew could have access to AKs and guns. That's effectively what it is in Ark Survival Ascended PvP, and even Ark Survival Evolved PvP to some extent. Obviously, community servers help alleviate this a bit, but the fundamental gameplay loop just doesn't support small tribes or newer players trying to get into the game. They need to take it back to formula. The artifacts to start with should not all spawn in the caves. They should have duplicate artifacts that can spawn around external in the map, maybe have them spawn in drops, have some way for other players to access these drops so that you don't have this monotonous loop of one tribe locking down the rest of the server, because it just doesn't give the rest of the players a chance. It gives 1%, even 0.5% of players a chance to compete in Ark PvP, and it's a redundant gameplay loop that we accept without questioning, but it really needs to be questioned at this point whether this is an effective way for servers to function. Because I can tell you, back in the day, before tech, Ark was a lot more fun and a lot more enjoyable and lasted a lot longer because every tribe could build around the map. You could build wherever you wanted, and everyone had the same level of progression. There wasn't one tribe that was locked behind a progression wall while the other tribes could just dominate against them. So I really feel like Ark needs to just simply look at where artifacts spawn, and we've all told them this over and over, and look at the gameplay design of Ark Survival Ascended. It was their chance to re-examine how good the gameplay loop of Ark is from a fundamental standpoint and readdress these issues, because I can tell you, if you give other tribes a chance of getting artifacts and having it so that one tribe can't simply lock down a server, then the servers will be much more healthy and you'll have a much more happy fan base. Also, the devs need to address this spawning issue. There needs to be a chance and a way for small tribes and small players and small groups and solos to play Ark without being dominated by these tribes who own the servers with tech. They need to be able to spawn in cracks and crevices. That has been a huge gameplay loop in Ark for years. Living in rat holes is a massive meta, and it's hugely popular on YouTube. You just look at players like Cinza and myself back in the day. I had some really successful videos living in rat holes. And Clemon, there was a lot of rat hole gameplay back in the day, and it was so much fun and so enjoyable, and I feel like the viewers loved it and the players loved it for the longest time, and it's just simply not available on Ark Survival Ascended. And it's not just the gameplay loop that's busted in Ascended, but also the mechanics. A lot of things need looking at. Not to mention the cryo issues, with cryopods being really funky since the inception of Ark Survival Ascended. It just turns players off. These mechanics need looking at. And the mouse camera not being snappy like Ark 1. It means that even gunplay and PvP movement and fighting is not as enjoyable as Ark 1, so it's backstep. You can't even shoot another player off the back of their teams. Not to mention the tiny size of character models, making it impossible to have a good, decent PvP fight that needs to be addressed. The graphics look slightly better, but even then it's a lot going on, and it's even more messy in some points with the foliage and things like that. So these are big issues that need to be addressed in Ark Survival Ascended to allow more players to come across, because at the moment only big tribes can survive, and that's it. There's no incentive for other players to come back and try and compete on a server unless you're playing ArkPoc with a fresh wipe. Other servers are just going to be stale and die, because anytime you try and build up, you will get destroyed by a tribe in tech. And this isn't even to mention the huge issues that ARK still has with cheating. Cheating is still rampant on the servers, and ARK are still failing and dropping the ball to address it. And it's getting to a stage where it's ridiculous. I was going to play the center, but I jumped in with the guys and they were getting aimbotted at the time. And I just don't have the time of day to play a game where the devs aren't even trying to police the servers or show that they care about the player base and answering tickets in a timely fashion. So these are huge gameplay issues that also need to be addressed with Ark Survival Ascended. And finally, with Ark Survival Ascended, we have issues with it being generic. As mentioned further, the looks of these new maps are getting generic as well, bland and easy to reproduce, no more handcrafted assets. The maps are made to get them out as fast as the devs can at a sacrifice of things that made Ark stand out in the past, like the church on Scorched Earth and other monuments around the map that made them feel individual. Now each map feels very similar, especially with the brown rocks everywhere. It's getting very samey. The center looks so much like the island, and it doesn't have that individual feel that it used to have. And that's the problem. Ark is just feeling cheap and generic at this point. And especially with more Unreal Engine 5 survival competitors coming out, it's going to be hard for them to keep up at this point, because other games are starting to do it better. So I want to see some more iconic landscapes and monuments come back to Ark and not be covered up with these generic replacements that are mass produced for convenience and getting the maps out in time and rushed, that make Ark stand out and individual and not feel so generic. So obviously there's a lot of issues with Ark Survival Ascended, as we've discussed, and I wanted to make this video to give the devs some ideas for some fixes, because I want the game to do well. This may seem overly critical, but it needs to be said. We need to call out the devs and do well, and we want it to do well, and this video is made from love. Ark needs to get out of this rut, get out of this identity crisis, and come back to its roots as a primitive, hardcore survival game that it started as. I've thought of some fixes that could help with Ark Survival Ascended. They could firstly take the time to go back to the foundation of Ark Survival Ascended and fix the glaring issues we've mentioned. Make rat holes viable, make them a part of the gameplay loop, support your small and solo groups, help players survive in small groups and not be dominated against the big tribes. Make artifacts spawn outside of caves in drops or at other monuments. Fix cryopods, fix the player movement system, fix the PvP foundations, make shooting long necks and guns and things like this feel fun again and satisfying. Make Ark fun again. That's simply it. The gameplay loop is redundant and in vital need of an overhaul and refresh that it should have got with Ark Survival Ascended. Not to mention, get on top of the cheaters. They're running rampant again. Ark could save itself by getting someone from the community involved in PvP to talk balance with them before throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. Revise these DLC practices you're engaging in and making the mechanics hugely pay to win, forcing players to buy DLC. This isn't the way we want to support you, Wildcard and Snail Games. We want Ark to do well. We want to support the game. You don't need to force us by making the creatures OP. Just give us some skins that don't affect gameplay, and I'll pay all day for that. But I'm not paying for the Pyromane, and I'm not playing the center until this shit is fixed, because it's an absolute joke, and you're ruining your name and what little reputation you've got left. Because I want to support Ark, but I don't want to feel forced to. Make the DLC cosmetic. It's simple. And I'll pay all day. I pay all day in Fortnite and New World for skins. I've paid so much money for skins in those games, and it's been my choice, not forced upon me. And I hate the idea of feeling forced to do it. It feels icky, it feels disgusting, and it feels hypocritical, especially after the things you've said in the past, Wildcard. The lies and hypocrisy is the issue. Please, just be better, do better. You can do better, and we can come back from this. Wildcard should make Ark Survival Ascended free at this point. Then the players can come across when the other issues are fixed, and we can move on to a bigger and better future where the Ark devs show they care for us again, and it's not just a generic gacha game where they're throwing whatever they can at us and seeing what sticks. Because Ark can come back from this. It's not too late. I make this video because I want them to. It weighs on me and seriously makes me sad to see Ark falling so low like this. I hope the Wildcard devs can stick it to Snail Games and push out a solid new DLC expansion like we used to get in the past, and stop throwing shit at the wall and hoping it sticks, because you're showing disrespect to the player base by not thinking about how these mechanics impact the gameplay, and they never impact the gameplay well, and you know this. I hope they show that they actually care and want Ark to do well, because that's what they need to do. And I don't want to feel like I'm just one of the last players holding the bag supporting the devs, because it's not our fault if Wildcard have money issues. It's the devs' fault, and they need to just improve the game and make it a game that people want to play, and they'll be fine again. So we need to go back to the basics, back to the core of what ARK used to be. Take us back, ARK, because we used to love ARK. I miss the old ARK, and I want it back.